Windows is an operating system designed and produced by Microsoft Corporation. Similar to other operating systems, Windows makes a computer system user-friendly by providing a graphical display and organizing information so that it can be easily accessed. The operating system uses icons and tools to simplify the complex operations performed by computers. Estimates suggest that 90% of personal computers use Windows. But this is now. How did it all begin? This is Just So You Know, a new series for people who like information. I'll try to make it a fun experience. Leave a like if this is the type of video that you want to see more of. In 1983, Microsoft announced the development of Windows, a graphical user interface for its own MS-DOS, which had been shipping with IBM PC and compatible computers for 2 years already. It was originally going to be called Interface Manager, but Roland Hansen, the head of marketing at Microsoft, convinced the company that the name Windows would be more appealing to customers. Fast forward 2 years and Microsoft Windows version 1 was released on November 20th, 1985. Windows 1 was not a complete operating system, but rather an operating environment that extended MS-DOS and shared the latter's inherent flaws and problems. This first version of Windows included a simple graphics program called Windows Paint, a simple word processor called Windows Write, and an appointment calendar, a card filer, a notepad, a clock, a control panel, a computer terminal, clipboard, and RAM driver. It also included the MS-DOS executive and a game called Reversi. Microsoft had worked with Apple Computer to develop several desk accessories and other minor pieces of software that were included with early Macintosh system software. As part of the related business negotiations, Microsoft had licensed certain aspects of the Macintosh user interface from Apple. In the development of Windows 1.0, Microsoft intentionally limited its borrowing of certain GUI elements from the Macintosh user interface in order to comply with its license. For example, windows were only displayed tiled on the screen, that is, they could not overlap or overlie one another. There was no trash can icon in which to delete items, since Apple claimed ownership of the rights to that. In 1987, Microsoft released Windows version 2 on December 9th. Much of the popularity for Windows 2.0 came by the way of its inclusion as a runtime version, with Microsoft's new graphical applications, Excel and Word for Windows. They could be run from MS-DOS, executing Windows for the duration of their activity and closing down Windows upon exit. Microsoft Windows received a major boost around this time when Atlas PageMaker appeared in a Windows version, having previously only run on Macintosh. Some computer historians date this, the first appearance of a significant and non-Microsoft application for Windows, as the beginning of the success of Windows. Version 2.0 used the real mode memory model, which confined it to a maximum of 1 megabyte of memory. Later, 2 new versions were released, Windows 286 2.1 and Windows 386 2.1. Like previous versions of Windows 286 2.1 used the real mode memory model, but was the first version to support high memory access. Windows 386 2.1 had a protected mode kernel with LIM's standard EMS emulation, the predecessor to XMS, which would finally change the topology of IBM PC computing. All Windows and DOS-based applications at the time were real mode, running over the protected mode kernel by using a virtual 8086 mode, which was new with the 80386 processor. With version 2.03 and later 3.0, Microsoft faced challenges from Apple over its overlapping windows and other features Apple charged mimicked the copyrighted look and feel of its operating system, embodied a generated copy of the Macintosh in its OS. Judge William Schwartzer dropped all but 10 of Apple's 189 claims of copyright infringement and ruled that most of the remaining 10 were over uncopyrightable ideas. During the mid to late 80s, Microsoft and IBM had cooperatively been developing OS/2 as a successor to DOS. OS/2 would take full advantage of the protected mode of the Intel 8286 processor and up to 16 megabytes of memory. OS2 1.0, released in 1987, supported swapping and multitasking and allowed running of DOS executables. A GUI called the Presentation Manager was not available with OS2 until version 1.1, released in 1988. Its API was incompatible with Windows. Among other things, Presentation Manager placed XY coordinates 00 at the bottom left of the screen, while Windows put 00 at the top left of the screen like most other computer Windows systems. Version 1.2, released in 1989, introduced a new file system, HPFS, to replace the FAT file system. Windows 3.0 originated in 1989 when David Wise and Murray Sargent independently decided to develop a protected mode Windows as an experiment. They cobbled together a rough prototype and presented it to the company executives, who were impressed enough to approve it as an official project. Microsoft scored a significant success with Windows 3.0, released May 22, 1990. In addition to improved capabilities given to native applications, Windows also allowed users to multitask older MS-DOS-based software compared to Windows 386, thanks to the introduction of virtual memory. Windows 3.0's user interface was finally a serious competitor to the user interface of the Macintosh computer. PCs had improved graphics by this time due to VGA video cards, and their protected enhanced mode allowed Windows applications to use more memory in a more painless manner than their DOS counterparts could. Windows 3.0 could run in Real, Standard, or 386 enhanced mode, and was compatible with any Intel processor from the 8086, 8088 up to the 80286 and 80386. This was the first version of Windows to run programs in protected mode, although the 386 enhanced mode kernel was an enhanced version of the protected mode kernel in Windows 386. A multimedia version, Windows 3.0 with Multimedia Extensions 1.0, was released several months later. This was bundled with multimedia upgrade kits comprising a CD-ROM drive and a sound card, such as the Creative Labs Sound Blaster Pro. This version was the precursor to the multimedia features available in Windows 3.1 and later, and was a part of Microsoft's specification for the multimedia PC. These features and growing market support for application software developers made Windows 3.0 wildly successful, selling around 10 million copies in just 2 years. Windows 3.0 became a major source of income for Microsoft and led the company to revive some of its earlier plans. By the early 1990s, conflicts developed in the Microsoft-IBM relationship. They cooperated with each other in developing their PC operating systems and had access to each other's code. Microsoft wanted to further develop Windows, while IBM desired for future work to be based on OS2. In an attempt to resolve this tension, IBM and Microsoft agreed that IBM would develop OS2 2.0 to replace OS2 1.3 and Windows 3.0, while Microsoft would develop a new operating system, OS2 3.0, to later succeed OS2 2.0. This agreement soon, however, fell apart, and the Microsoft-IBM relationship was terminated. IBM continued to develop OS2 while Microsoft changed the name of its as yet unreleased OS2 3.0 to Windows NT. Both retained the rights to use OS2 and Windows technology developed up to the termination of the agreement. Windows NT, however, was to be written anew, mostly independently. After an interlude 1.3 release to fix up the remaining problems with the version 1 series, IBM released OS2 version 2.0 in 1992. This was a major improvement. It featured a new object-oriented GUI, the workplace shell, that included a desktop and was considered to be OS2's best feature. Microsoft would later imitate much of it in Windows 95. Version 2.0 also provided full 32-bit API, offered smooth multitasking, and could take advantage of 4 GB of address space provided by the Intel 80386. Still, much of the system still had 16-bit code internally, which required, among other things, device drivers to be 16-bit code as well. This was one of the reasons for the chronic shortage of OS2 drivers for the latest devices. Version 2.0 could also run DOS and Windows 3.0 programs, since IBM retained the right to use DOS and Windows code as the result of the breakup. In response to the impending release of OS2 2.0, Microsoft developed Windows 3.1, which included several minor improvements to Windows 3.0, such as TrueType scalable fonts, but primarily consisted of bug fixes and multimedia support. It also excluded support for real mode and ran only on an 80286 or better processor. Later, Microsoft also released Windows 3.11, a touch-up to Windows 3.1 which included all of the patches and updates that followed the release of Windows 3.1 in 1992. Around the same time, Windows released Windows for Workgroups, which was available both as an add-on for existing Windows 3.1 installations and in a version that included the base Windows environment and the networking extensions all in one package. Windows for Workgroups included improved network drivers and protocol stacks and support for peer-to-peer networking. One optional download for Windows for Workgroups was the Wolverine TCP/IP protocol stack, which allowed for easy access to the internet through corporate networks. There were two versions of Windows for Workgroups, 3.1 and 3.11. Unlike the previous versions, Windows for Workgroups 3.11 only ran in 386 enhanced mode and requires at least an 80386SX processor. All these versions continued version 3.0's impressive sales pace. Even though the 3.1 series still lacks some of the important features of OS 2, such as long file names, a desktop, or protection of the system against misbehaving applications, Microsoft quickly took over the OS and GUI markets for the IBM PC. The Windows API became the standard for consumer software. Meanwhile, Microsoft continued to develop Windows NT. The main architect of the system was Dave Cutler, one of the chief architects at Digital Equipment Corporation, later purchased by Compaq. Microsoft hired him in August 1988 to create a successor to OS 2, but Cutler created a completely new system instead. Cutler had been developing a project at DEC called Mica, and when DEC dropped the project, he brought the expertise and about 20 engineers with him to Microsoft. DEC also believed he brought Mica's code to Microsoft and sued. Microsoft eventually paid $150 million and agreed to support DEC's Alpha CPU chip in NT. Windows NT 3.1 arrived in beta form to developers at the July 1992 Professional Developers Conference in San Francisco. Microsoft named it 3.1 because marketing wanted Windows NT to appear to be a continuation of Windows 3.1. Microsoft announced at the conference its intentions to develop a successor to both Windows NT and Windows 3.1's replacement, Windows 95, then codenamed Chicago, which would unify the two into one operating system. This successor was codenamed Cairo. In hindsight, Cairo was a much more difficult project than Microsoft had anticipated, and as a result, the NT and Chicago lines would not be unified until Windows XP in 2001. Parts of Cairo have still not made it into Windows, specifically the WinFS file system, which was much touted object file system of Cairo. After NT came out on July 27, 1993, driver support was lacking due to the increased programming difficulty in dealing with NT's superior hardware abstraction model. This problem plagued the NT line all the way through Windows 2000. Programmers complained that it was too hard to write drivers for NT, and hardware developers were not going to go through the trouble of developing drivers for a small segment of the market. Additionally, although allowing for good performance and fuller exploitation of system resources, it was also resource-intensive on limited hardware and thus was the only suitable for larger, more expensive machines. However, these same features made Windows NT perfect for the LAN server, which in 1993 was experiencing a rapid boom as office networking was becoming common. NT also had advanced network connectivity options and the efficient NTFS file system. Windows NT version 3.51 was Microsoft's entry into this field and took away market share from Novell, the dominant player, in the following years. One of Microsoft's biggest advances initially developed for Windows NT was a new 32-bit API to replace the legacy 16-bit Windows API. This API was called Win32, and from then on, Microsoft referred to the older 16-bit API as Win16. The Win32 API had three main implementations, one for Windows NT, one for Windows 32, which was a subset of Windows 32, which could be used on Windows 3.1 systems, and one for Chicago. Thus, Microsoft sought to ensure some degree of compatibility between the Chicago design and Windows NT, even though the two systems had radically different internal architectures. Windows NT was the first Windows operating system based on a hybrid kernel. After Windows 3.11, Microsoft began to develop a new consumer-oriented version of the operating system codenamed Chicago. Chicago was designed to have support for 32 preemptive multitasking like OS2 and Windows NT, although a 16-bit kernel would remain for the sake of backward compatibility. The Windows 32 API, first introduced with Windows NT, was adopted as the standard 32-bit programming interface, with Win16 compatibility being preserved. And interestingly enough, a new interface was not originally planned as part of the release. Microsoft did not change all of the Windows code to 32-bit. Parts of it remained 16-bit for reasons of compatibility, performance, and development time. Additionally, it was necessary to carry over design decisions from earlier versions of Windows for reasons of backward compatibility, even if those design decisions no longer matched a more modern computing environment. These factors eventually began to impact the operating system's efficiency and stability. Microsoft marketing adopted Windows 95 as the product name for Chicago when it was released on August 24, 1995. Microsoft had a double gain from its release. First, it made it impossible for consumers to run Windows 95 on a cheaper non-Microsoft DOS. Secondly, although traces of DOS were never completely removed from the system, and a version of DOS would be loaded briefly as part of the booting process, Windows 95 applications ran solely in 386 enhanced mode with a flat 32-bit address space and virtual memory. These features made it possible for Win32 applications to address up to 2 GB of virtual RAM, with another 2 GB reserved for the operating system, and in theory prevented them from inadvertently corrupting the memory space of other Win32 applications. In this respect, the functionality of Windows 95 moved closer to Windows NT, although Windows 95 did not support more than 512 MB of physical RAM without obscure system tweaks. IBM continued to market OS2, producing later versions in OS2 3.0 and 4.0, also called Warp. Responding to complaints about OS2 2.0's high demands on computer hardware, version 3.0 was significantly optimized both for speed and size. Before Windows 95 was released, OS2 Warp 3.0 was even shipped pre-installed with several large German hardware vendor chains. However, with the release of Windows 95, OS2 began to lose market share. It is probably impossible to choose one specific reason why OS2 failed to gain much market share. While OS2 continued to run Windows 3.1 applications, it lacked support for anything but the Win32's subset of Win32 API. Unlike with Windows 3.1, IBM did not have access to the source code for Windows 95 and was unwilling to commit the time and resources to emulate the moving target of Win32 API. IBM later introduced OS2 into the United States versus Microsoft case, blaming unfair marketing tactics on Microsoft's part. Microsoft went on to release 5 different versions of Windows 95. Windows 95, the original release, Windows 95A, which included OSR1 slipstreamed into the installation. Windows 95B, or OSR2, included several major enhancements, Internet Explorer 3.0 and full FAT32 support. Windows 95B USB OSR 2.1, including basic USB support, and Windows 95C OSR 2.5, including all of the above features, plus Internet Explorer 4.0. This was the last version of 95 produced. OS Release 2, 2.1, and 2.5 were not released to the general public. Rather, they were available only to OEMs that would preload the OS onto computers. Some companies sold new hard drives with OSR2 pre-installed, officially justifying this as needed due to the hard drive's capacity. The first Microsoft Plus add-on pack was sold for Windows 95. Windows NT 4.0 was the next release of Microsoft's Windows NT line of operating systems. It released on August 24, 1996. It was a 32-bit Windows operating system available in both workstation and server editions with the graphical environment similar to that of Windows 95. The NT designation in the product's title initially stood for New Technology, according to Microsoft's then CEO, Bill Gates, but now no longer has any specific meaning. Windows NT 4.0 is classified as a hybrid kernel operating system. One significant difference from previous versions of Windows NT is the graphics device interface is incorporated into the kernel to speed up the graphical user interface, resulting in a significant performance improvement over Windows NT 3.51, and also creating the requirement to have graphic drivers located in the kernel, resulting in potential stability issues. It was the first release of Microsoft Windows to include DirectX as standard. Version 2 shipped it with the initial release of NT 4.0. Unlike Windows 95, Windows NT 4.0 didn't support Direct3D and hardware-accelerated graphics were not available. Windows NT 4.0 also introduced a new Windows Task Manager application. Previous versions of Windows NT included the Task List application, but it only shows applications currently in memory. To monitor how much CPU and memory resources are being used, users were forced to use Performance Monitor. The Task Manager offers a more convenient way of getting a snapshot of all the applications running on the system at any given time. On June 25, 1998, Microsoft released Windows 98. It included new hardware drivers and better support for FAT32 file system, which allows support for disk partitions larger than the 2 GB maximum accepted by Windows 95. The USB support in Windows 98 is far superior to the unreliable support provided by the later editions of Windows 95. It also controversially integrated the Internet Explorer browser into the Windows GUI and Windows Explorer file manager, prompting the opening of the United States versus Microsoft case, dealing with the question of whether Microsoft was abusing its hold on the PC operating system market to unfairly compete with companies such as Netscape. On May 5, 1999, Microsoft released Windows 98 2nd Edition, an interim release whose most notable feature was the addition of internet connection sharing, which was a form of network access translation, allowing several machines on a LAN to share a single internet connection. Second Edition was also much easier to use and much smoother than the first edition of Windows 98. Hardware support through the device drivers was increased. Many minor problems present in the original Windows 98 were found and fixed, which make it, according to many, the most stable release of the Windows 9X family. Microsoft released Windows 2000, known during its development cycle as Windows NT 5.0, in February 17, 2000. It was successfully deployed both on the server and the workstation markets. Amongst Windows 2000's most significant new features was Active Directory, a near complete replacement of the NT 4.0 Windows Server domain model, which built on industry standard technologies to connect machines to one another. Terminal services, previously only available as a separate edition of NT4, was expanded to all server versions. A number of features from Windows 98 were incorporated as well, such as an improved device manager, Windows Media Player, and a revived DirectX that made it possible for the first time to play modern games on an NT kernel. Windows 2000 is also the last NT kernel operating system to lack product activation. While Windows 2000 upgrades were available for Windows 95 and 98, it was not intended for home users. Windows 2000 was available in 6 editions: Windows 2000 Professional, Windows 2000 Server, Windows 2000 Advanced Server, Windows 2000 Data Center Server, Windows 2000 Advanced Server Limited Edition, and Windows 2000 Data Center Server Limited Edition. In September 2000, Microsoft introduced Windows ME Millennium Edition, which upgraded Windows 98 with enhanced multimedia and internet features. It also introduced the first version of System Restore, which allowed users to revert their system state to a previous known good point in the case of system failure. System Restore was a notable feature that made its way into Windows XP. The first version of Windows Movie Maker was introduced as well. Windows ME was conceived as a quick 1-year project that served as a stopgap between the release of Windows 98 and Windows XP. Many of the new features were available from the Windows Update site as updates for older Windows versions, except System Restore and Movie Maker. As a result, Windows ME was not acknowledged as a unique operating system along the lines of 95 or 98. Windows ME was widely criticized for serious stability issues and for lacking real mode DOS support, to the point of being referred to as the Mistake Edition. Windows ME was the last operating system to be based on the Windows 9X kernel and MS-DOS. Windows XP was the successor to both Windows 2000 Professional and Windows ME, and is the first consumer-oriented operating system produced by Microsoft to be built on the Windows NT kernel and architecture. Windows XP was first released on October 25, 2001, and over 400 million copies were in use in 2006. Windows XP features a new task-based graphical interface. The Start menu and Windows indexing service were redesigned, and many visual effects were added, including a translucent blue selection rectangle in Explorer, drop shadows for icon labels on the desktop, task-based sidebars in Explorer windows, the ability to group the taskbar buttons of the windows of one application into one button, the ability to lock the taskbar and other toolbars to prevent accidental changes, and the highlighting of recently added programs on the Start menu. While Windows XP was successful overall, the initial release met with considerable criticism, particularly in the area of security, leading to the release of 3 major service packs. Service Pack 1 was released in September of 2002, Service Pack 2 came out in August 2004, and Service Pack 3 came out in April 2008. Service Pack 2 provided significant improvements and encouraged widespread adoption of XP among both home and business users. Windows XP lasted longer as Microsoft's flagship operating system than any other version of Windows, from 2001 to January 30, 2007, when it was succeeded by Windows Vista. Windows Vista, codenamed Longhorn, was released on November 30th, 2006 to business customers, with consumer versions following on January 30th, 2007. Windows Vista intended to have enhanced security by introducing a new restricted user mode called User Account Control, replacing the administrator by default philosophy of Windows XP. One major difference between Vista and earlier versions of Windows, Windows 95 and later, is that the original Start button was replaced with just the Windows icon. Vista also features new graphic features, the Windows Arrow GUI, new applications such as Windows Calendar, Windows DVD Maker, and some new games including Chess, Mahjong, and Purple Plays, Internet Explorer 7, Windows Media Player 11, and a large number of underlying architectural changes. All editions except Starter Edition were available in both 32 and 64-bit versions. The big advantage of the 64-bit version was breaking the 4GB memory barrier, which 32-bit computers cannot fully access. Windows 7 was released to manufacturing on January 22, 2009, and reached general retail availability on October 22, 2009. It was previously known by the code names Blackcomb and Vienna. Windows 7 was primarily intended to be an incremental upgrade to the operating system, intending to address Windows Vista's poor critical reception while maintaining hardware and software compatibility. Windows 7 continued improvements on Windows Arrow with the addition of the redesigned taskbar that allows applications to be pinned to it, and the new window management features. Some of the other features of Windows 7 are faster booting, device stage, Windows PowerShell, less obstructive user account control, multi-touch, improved window management, home group networking, multiple thumbnails for combined taskbar icons, and better power management for notebooks. Many new items have been added to the control panel, including ClearType Text Tuner Display, Color Calibration Wizard, Gadgets, Recovery, Troubleshooting, Workspace Center, Location and other sensors, Credential Manager, Biometric devices, System icons, and display. Features included with Windows Vista and not in Windows 7 include the sidebar, although gadgets remain, and several programs that were removed in favor of downloading their Windows Live counterparts. On October 26, 2012, Microsoft released Windows 8 to the public. One edition, Windows RT, was made specifically for tablets. Windows 8 provides a redesigned user interface designed to make it easier for touchscreen users to use Windows. The interface introduced an updated start menu known as the Start Screen and a new full-screen application platform. The desktop interface is also present for running Windows applications, although Windows RT will not run any desktop applications that aren't included in the system. New features also include USB 3.0 support, the Windows Store, the ability to run USB drives with Windows To Go, and others. Windows 8 was given the kernel number NT 6.2. Windows 8.1 was released on October 17, 2013. Windows 8.1 was available as an update in the Windows Store for Windows 8 users only, and also available to download for clean installation. Visible enhancements include an improved start screen, additional snap views, additional bundled apps, tighter OneDrive integration, Internet Explorer 11, a Bing-powered unified search system, restoration of a visible start button on the taskbar, and the ability to restore the previous behavior of opening the user's desktop on login instead of the start screen. Windows 8.1 also added support for such emerging technologies as high-resolution displays, 3D printing, Wi-Fi Direct, and Mirrorcast streaming, as well as the REFS file system. Windows 10, codenamed Threshold, is the current release of the Microsoft Windows operating system. Unveiled on August 30th, 2014, it was released on July 29th, 2015. It was distributed without charge to Windows 7 and 8.1 users for 1 year after release. A number of new features like Cortana, the Microsoft Edge web browser, the ability to view Windows Store apps as a window instead of full screen, virtual desktops, revamped core apps, Continuum, and a unified settings app were all features debuted in Windows 10. Microsoft has announced that Windows 10 will be the last major version of its series of operating systems to be released. Instead, Microsoft will release major updates to the operating system via download or in Windows Update, similar to the way updates are delivered in Mac OS. Wow, you finally made it to the end of the video. That was a lot of me talking, wasn't it? Anyway, be sure to subscribe if you want more stuff like this, and leave a like down below if it helped you out. More videos are coming. Thank you for watching.